Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and we're going to be doing our 6th front end. I have my backend running. Again, this is the same to-dos app backend, and what we're going to do in this time is we're going to do it straight with web components. So no frameworks, just using the normal web component browser API that was added a few years ago. So let's make a new folder. We'll call this webc front end because it's web components. And essentially all you really need here is, you don't need to do anything special. We just do new file, index.html, and new file, app.js. Okay, and what I'm going to do is here, we're going to create an HTML boilerplate, and we're going to bring in the script tag. Okay, and then we're going to put an app.js here. I always like to add a defer keyword to avoid any DOM issues. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to make one component, just a component called app-to-do. Okay. And basically our entire application will be inside this app-to-do component. Okay, just to kind of show you what you can do with web components. And again, this is a straight browser API, so you can do this, again, without having to install Node or do any fancy building or add any fancy script tags to a library. It's just something you can do. So how does this work? So basically what you're doing is you're creating a class. So we're going to call it to-do app that extends the HTML element subclass. Okay. And basically we'll leave it at that for the moment. Then you cannot find HTML element. It exists. Okay. And then basically what you do after that, you would just do custom elements dot define, and then you would put in the name of the tag, which would be to do app. That's the tag that you saw me put in the index.html. And then we add we link it to this class. So now what's going to happen is that whenever it sees an HTML tag saying to do app, it will use this class to build it out. Okay. Cool. These are all Deno errors. So cool. Okay, so now basically what we want to do is we need to call the constructor of our class, and like any constructor we need to call super because it's an extended class. Super. And then here we can define whatever we need to define. Okay, so the way I usually, and again this is a blank canvas, so how you use these components is really up to how you want to use them. I do have like a couple libraries that create base classes that kind of put a lot of things in place for you, which we'll do a separate video on. But basically the way this works, or the way I would do this, is I would create a render function, so that way it feels a lot like React. Okay, so we'll have that render function. We'll come back and fill it in a little bit later on. And essentially I'm going to create a couple variables, this.todos, because we need to store all those to-dos somewhere. Okay, and I will this.title just to kind of show you some interpolation. So this will be to-do app. And what we want to do is create a little shadow DOM. So what the shadow DOM is, it's just basically takes the DOM, basically gives this component its own little mini DOM that's self-encapsulated. So basically the stuff outside can't see inside, and stuff inside can't see outside, sort of. The way we do that is you just do this dot attach shadow. This function attaches a shadow, and then inside there you want to pass in an object that just says mode open. There's really never a reason to do mode close, which just makes it really hard for you to see anything inside the DevTools. And really, I can't think of a situation where you really want that closed. So that creates the shadow. Good, so that is created. And then we're going to want to do is that the minute the shadow is created, we're going to call the render function to actually populate the shadow. Okay, good. Okay, this dot render. So now we're going to go over here, and somewhere we're going to want this dot shadow root. So it's no longer the document. So before you would do like document dot this dot inner HTML, think of this dot shadow root as the same as document for the overall DOM. So this dot shadow, but this dot shadow root is just for this particular component and this particular instance of the component. So this dot shadow root dot inner HTML equals, and then we'll just do some backticks. And then here you can just type in whatever HTML you want to put it in there. So of course we're going to want, so I usually just do this, so that way it looks nice. So we're going to have the title, and then since I use backticks, I can just use interpolation. So we can just do this dot title here, so that way it says to do slash h1, and already at this point we should see something in the DOM, okay? Because basically right now when the DOM loads, it's going to see this tag. Our JavaScript is going to have registered this element with the browser. So then it's going to know when it sees that tag to run this code. The constructor is going to do all this stuff, create the shadow root, and then run the render function, which is going to say this is the HTML. So right now we should already be able to see the h1 in the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here, open with live server. Okay, that's a Visual Studio Code extension. That makes it pretty easy to run stuff. Okay, and right now we don't see the h1 yet. So that means there's something I am missing here. This dot render, this dot shadow root. I probably messed up this function over here. So let me take a look at my test run. I always kind of misspelled something there. So let's see here. Whoopsie, front, the script to the bottom. It's custom elements. Knew it. Okay, custom elements dot define. So let's hit save. Now we should see the h1 over here. Still. So let's go back to over here. Custom elements dot define to do app. Let's make sure that matches the. Oh, well there we go. That doesn't match. It's app to do. So app to do. There we go. That should do it. And there you go. You see to do app. Okay, because again you have to link the tag to the class, and that the name of the tag is app to do. Cool. Okay, so that's done. Okay, so the next thing to think about is getting those to-dos rendered. Okay, so here's how I'm going to approach this. Whenever I have to, the way I like to do sort of iterating, you still use map like you would use with React, but I always like to do it as a separate variable beforehand and then interpolate it in there. So here's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say const to do. I'm going to say const to do string, okay, because this is really going to be a string of HTML of the to dos equals this dot to dos dot map. And then what it's going to do, it's going to take each individual to do and backticks, generate an h2, and interpolate the to do into it. Okay, so I'm just using basic JavaScript interpolation. h2 into it, and then that would give me an array of all these h2 strings. Now the problem is, if I were to just interpolate that array into this string over here, there's gonna be a bunch of commas in it because it's an array, and the array, everything's separated by commas. So what I want to do is make sure this is just one big string. So this will generate an array of those h2s, and then what I want to do is chain off of it dot join, and then put in an empty string. So that way, just mushes all that array into one string, which will be held in this variable. And then what I can do here is just interpolate that into the string. Ta-da. Cool. But right now there are no to-dos. Okay, the to-do array is empty, which means I need to call the API to populate that to-do. So what I need is a function that runs when the component initially loads. I could make one and put it in the constructor, but there's already one that's built in called connected callback. Okay, it's built into the whole web component API. So connected callback. Okay. And then here I would just do a fetch call. So fetch. And again, where we're fetching from, you've seen me do this 1,000 times now if you've been watching this video series. HTTP localhost 4000 was the endpoint. Then we do a dot then response equals response.json, and then I take the dot then, and I am going to take the JSON and I'm going to do some stuff with it. So I'm going to use curly brackets. First thing I'm going to want to do is take this dot to-dos and make it equal the JSON array we just got. And I'm going to want to re-render my component. This is essentially what setState does in React. It basically, we update the variables and then it runs the render function again. So this dot render, cool, and that'll re-render the component the minute that API call finishes. But it doesn't do it again because this connected callback only runs when the component's initially connected to the DOM. And then there's disconnected callback for when it gets disconnected from the DOM. So I save, and now we should get to the point where, see, all the to-dos got iterated. Yay! Now we just need to add the input. So see, this is going by pretty quick. Again, once you know the web component API, it's pretty quick. It's a pretty quick setup. You don't have to download all these CLI tools and do all this fun stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to do an input. Input type equals text. Type equals text, and what I want is type equals text, name equals input. Well, there's only one input, so I don't really need a name tag. You'll see what I'm going to do here. So there's the input, and then there's the button. Okay, and then there's, we're going to call the button click or submit. Okay. So in that case, since it's simple, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to assign these two elements to a variable that I can then use later on. So this dot input, okay, is going to equal this dot shadow root dot query selector. So this works just like normal DOM manipulation in JavaScript. And I just want to select the input tag. So this just grabs the input tag, stores it in that variable in the class, so I can use it somewhere else. This dot button equals this dot shadow root dot query selector button. And again, this render function is always going to run before anything else runs, so I know these two variables will exist, so I won't run into any weird collision issues. Usually it's probably a little tidier to declare them up here, but just to kind of illustrate a point. Okay, this dot shadow root dot query selector button. So again, we have the button. Now I do want to assign a event handler to the button. Actually, we'll come back to the event handler. First, we'll create the function, because I want it when you click that button, it's going to take whatever you typed into the form and make the API call. So we'll just create a function, handle submit. This becomes one big class. So generally, probably what you should do is take each component you create and make it one JavaScript file, which would be one script tag in your file. Okay, handle submit. Okay, handle submit. And this is essentially when you use Stencil, which was my previous video, this is kind of what it's creating. This is what it's doing under the hood. Okay. I always just like working with sort of the plain vanilla JavaScript as much as possible, because once you know how JavaScript works, you just do it. You don't have to kind of be arguing with somebody else's code and their framework. You just do it. Handle submit. So what I want here is we're going to do a fetch call. So fetch http/localhost 4000. Then we're going to pass in an object. There's our object. And method equals post. So you've seen me do this quite a few times now. Headers equal content type. I mean, I could create functions and libraries to make this just easier, since I'm doing a lot of the same stuff over and over again. But again, the idea is to show you how to do it so that way you know the underlying JavaScript to be able to create your own tools and be able to understand other people's tools. Okay, and then application JSON. Okay, and let's see here. That's all I need for that headers. And then what I need is, I need a comma there. We need the body. The body's got to be stringified, so JSON.stringify, because it's got to be a JSON string. And we have to pass in, because our API, it's expecting an object with a property called to-do, because that's how we built it in the very first video in this series. And that to-do should be this dot input dot value, the current value of the input. Cool. So then that fetch happens. Then we do a dot then. Okay, and that is going to response. Again, we have to do the response.json thing. And then we're going to do another dot then. And we get the JSON back. And then here I do want to do some stuff, so I'll use curly brackets. Okay, first thing I'm going to want to do is do the JSON response we get back should be the new list of to-dos with the additional to-do. So this dot to-dos is now going to equal JSON again. I want to re-render the component, but even before I do that, I want this dot input dot value to equal an empty string, so that way the form clears itself out after you hit submit. And then I want to do the render. This dot render. Good. So the only thing missing is that right now this function is not hooked up. Handle submit is not hooked up to this button that we created. So I should do that after we create the button, which would be right over here. So I'll just do this dot button dot add, because the button is now stored in this variable. So dot add event listener. Okay, and it's going to be a click event. And what happens here is we'll just create an arrow function, again, just to avoid this binding stuff, this dot handle submit. Okay, cool, because the arrow function, the great thing about arrow function is that it doesn't have a this that this belongs to, so when I do this and then I call the underlying this dot handle submit, this is going to be the underlying component, because there's no this bound to this arrow function. Okay, save. And that was kind of the issue I struggled with during the stencil video, because I just wasn't thinking about that, even though I've done 1,000 videos on it. Okay, so this should all work, but just to kind of walk through again. Component gets rendered, the constructor runs, creates the shadow, the shadow. You don't have to have a shadow. You can just incorporate it into the actual DOM if you want, but this, again, encapsulation is always the key with components. So this creates the shadow, runs the render function down here, which what it does is just basically puts this template string to the inner HTML of the shadow root that was created in the constructor. Okay, and then also then assigns these variables, the button and the input, and adds the event listener to the button. When the button is clicked, it runs this handle submit function, which makes the API call and resets the input. And then again, at the when the component first loads, it makes an API call to get the initial list of to-dos. And that's our component. Okay, so now if I go here, we'll say get lunch, hit submit, and something didn't work. So let's take a look at the console, see what happened. Nothing happened, so let's examine our, well, let's first refresh it. Refresh. Okay, get lunch. So let's examine. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a console log in my handle submit function. First, just to find out if the handle submit function is even running in the first place. Console.log. Hello. That's always the first thing before we debug a function. I want to make sure the function is even being run. Okay, and this dot handle submit, which is correct, and that the name of it is handle submit, so that should be, and this dot button should equal this shadow query selector button. So it should equal, oh, my button isn't formatted right, so let's fix that. Could be part of the problem. Okay, save, so we fixed my button tag. So this should grab that button. Yeah, so let's give it a shot. So refresh. Let's do get lunch. Okay, so this is not registering that click event. So let me think about how I want to add event listener. Click this dot shadow root dot query selector button. That's the only button. So that should work, but just to be careful, just in case, what I will do is I will do this. I will copy this code. So that way, instead of calling it from the variable, I will just go direct. This dot shadow root. Yep, that's just TypeScript stuff. Let's run that again. Get lunch. Okay, let me take a look at my test run. Pretty sure I added the event listener pretty much the same way. Yep. Query selector, this dot shadow root, query selector button, add event listener, click. Yeah, pretty much did the same thing. Let's walk through our logic here. The button is being rendered. So then this that button dot add event listener adds a click listener. This dot handle submit, it's adding it to the button. But it doesn't want to run this particular handle submit. Trying to think as to where do we see this different here. Dot query selector dot add event listener, click this dot handle submit. Oh, that's the new one. This is the previous one. Button add event listener query this dot handle submit. Only thing different is, well, I don't need this anymore. I'm gonna go this route. Shadow root. Let's take a look at my constructor, see if that's doing anything funky. Oh, I totally just saw it. Forgot to invoke the function. Oi, Alex. Okay. Get lunch. And there we go, it works. Okay. Whew, that was bad. Why? Two parentheses. Okay. But yeah, that's it. We did it using web components. So that's not too bad. Okay. But as you can get a little verbose, and you have to do all that, like grabbing of elements. I'll show you sort of a library I made that's like a base class based on this called basic element that just kind of adds a few little things just to make some of these, to automate some of these pieces. Okay, but I'll see you guys there. Have a good one. Ciao.